At 3:19 p.m. on a windy Tuesday in St. Louis, a narcotics detective slapped handcuffs on my wrists in a cracked parking lot like I was just another problem he could drag into a station. I looked him dead in the eye and said, calm and clear, "You're arresting a federal agent." He smiled like he'd finally found a way out and muttered, "Let the judge sort it out," and yeah, that happened. The one man who thought he was untouchable decided to arrest the guy who'd been quietly building the case that would ruin him. I'm Darius Cole. I work public corruption for the FBI, which is a fancy way of saying I spend most days watching people in power do little illegal things they swear are normal, and then acting shocked when somebody finally calls it what it is. I'm not the kind of agent you see on TV kicking doors and throwing dramatic punches. I'm the kind of agent who can stare at a spreadsheet until my eyes hurt and still notice the pattern that makes the whole story collapse, because corruption is almost never loud. At first, it's small and casual, like a guy slipping an envelope into a pocket and pretending it's not there. I grew up on the north side of the city, raised by a mom who worked double shifts as a nurse and a dad who fixed air conditioners until his hands looked permanently gray. We weren't starving, but we were always one busted transmission away from panic, you know what I mean? My mom kept an emergency envelope taped inside a kitchen cabinet, and she'd tap it sometimes like it was a lucky charm. And I didn't understand what that kind of fear does to a person until I was 14, and my cousin Andre got pulled over for a broken taillight and ended up face down on the pavement with an officer's boot pressed into his back. Andre wasn't perfect. He talked too much. He had that teenage ego where he wanted to look tough in front of his friends, but he wasn't armed, he wasn't swinging, he wasn't violent. And still, somehow the report later said he resisted 3 witnesses, said he didn't. Internal Affairs cleared the officer in under a month like it was a routine oil change, and Andre spent a week in the hospital trying to swallow with a swollen jaw and pretending he wasn't scared every time footsteps came down the hallway. Watching my aunt cry in that waiting room while the officer who did it joked with his partner outside like nothing happened, something in me settled into place. Not just anger, more like clarity, the kind that makes your stomach go cold, because I realized the system wasn't failing by accident, it was built to protect itself, and if I wanted to fight that, I couldn't do it with a megaphone, I had to do it with proof. So I studied criminal justice, went federal, did the Quantico thing, learned how to build cases that don't fall apart because somebody misplaced a piece of evidence or forgot a step, and I took extra training in financial crimes because money doesn't care about excuses, money leaves footprints, and corrupt people always think they're smarter than the trail they're leaving. Fast forward to 7 months before that Tuesday, when a civil rights attorney named Rachel Vance filed a detailed complaint with the DOJ. She'd represented 3 clients arrested by the same narcotics detective, and she noticed the same little coincidences each time, searches that didn't make sense unless you assume the officer already knew what he planned to find, evidence that appeared too late. Witness statements that suddenly got quiet, judges suppressing key pieces of evidence because something was off. But the department kept shrugging because, well, the arrest numbers looked great and the paperwork said everything was fine. The detective's name was Trent Malloy, 18 years on the Metro Police Department, 6 years in narcotics. And inside that building, he was a hero because he produced stats. Big arrests, big seizures, big headlines, the kind of guy supervisors love because he makes the weekly report look like progress. In the community, his name landed different, more like a warning, because over the past 6 years he'd racked up complaint after complaint for excessive force and illegal searches, all unfounded. 5 civil lawsuits that the city settled quietly with taxpayer money, and Trent never lost a single vacation day over it, which should tell you how comfortable he'd become. Then I looked at his finances, and that's where my patience turned into focus, because Trent made around 70 grand a year and still managed to buy a lifted pickup that cost more than my first apartment, a new boat, and a little cabin outside town, like he was living 2 lives. And his bank activity showed frequent cash deposits that were just a little too neat, like somebody taught him the phrase just under 10 grand and he thought that was magic. Corruption cases don't move like action movies, they move like knitting, one loop at a time. You review old body cam footage until you know an officer's habits better than his own supervisor does. You pull court transcripts, suppression hearings, internal memos. You interview people who don't trust you and try not to take it personally when they flinch at your badge anyway, because fear doesn't care what agency you work for. In Trent's case, the patterns were loud once you stopped listening to the department's PR and started listening to the fax reports that shifted between the scene and the station searches, justified by vibes instead of real probable cause evidence appearing in photos that wasn't mentioned in the initial report. Witnesses describing intimidation, like, "If you don't cooperate, I can make your life hard." And then the money-structured deposits spread out in a way that made my eyes narrow. because over 2 years we identified about $93,000 in cash deposits that didn't fit his salary, not even close, and money like that doesn't just fall out of the sky. The turning point came through Trent's former partner Nolan Briggs, a guy who looked tired even when he smiled like he'd been holding something heavy for too long. And when I first approached him, he didn't confess like in the movies. He tested me. He asked what I wanted, and I told him straight, "I want facts on record." And he stared at me for a long second and said, "Quiet. He's going to destroy you if you're not careful." That one sentence told me Nolan knew exactly how far Trent would go, and it told me Nolan was scared, and honestly I didn't blame him, because the so-called blue wall isn't just a phrase, it's a real thing people hide behind, and the people who don't hide get crushed. We offered Nolan a cooperation agreement, not a free pass, but a path, tell the truth now or let the truth bury you later. And 2 days after that, he agreed to wear a wire. For 5 weeks, Nolan recorded conversations with Trent that made my stomach turn. Trent joking about planting a backup bag if a search came up empty, laughing about how complaints never stick, bragging about collecting street taxes from dealers' cash in exchange for looking the other way. And he talked like it was all just smart business, like he'd convinced himself he wasn't corrupt, just efficient. By the time October rolled around, prosecutors had a grand jury moving. The indictment was basically forming like a storm, and we were in that final stretch where you do surveillance to lock down the last details, confirm routines, verify meetings, make sure there's no hole a defense attorney can crawl through. On that Tuesday, Nolan gave us a lead that Trent was meeting a known dealer named Jamal Cross, not somewhere normal like a coffee shop. Of course not. It was an industrial strip near the riverfront behind a shuttered tire warehouse where half the streetlights didn't work. The kind of place that makes you check your mirrors even if you're just driving through. I drove an unremarkable gray sedan, wore jeans and a hoodie and a jacket that made me look like every other guy trying to get through fall without buying new clothes. My recording device was running. My body cam was concealed, my camera lens was set, and I parked about 100 yards off with a clean line of sight and waited. At 2:47 p.m., Trent rolled in with that loud confidence some men carry, like cologne parked, got out, scanned the lot like he owned the air. Jamal arrived a few minutes later in a black coupe. They didn't shake hands. They stood between their cars, close enough to exchange something quickly, far enough to pretend they weren't together, and I watched Trent hand over a slim envelope. Then Jamal handed him a brick-shaped package wrapped in brown paper, heavy, quick, the kind of exchange that screams trouble even if you don't hear a word. My heart didn't race like it used to when I was younger. It just settled into that steady hum, because experience doesn't kill adrenaline. It teaches it manners, and I was recording everything, time, location, participants, the whole thing, when Trent's head turned and he saw my car. Now here's the thing. Trent didn't know what I looked like. He'd never met me. He only knew there was a federal investigation out there somewhere, and guys like him usually assume they can stall it, bury it, talk their way around it. But when he saw a car he didn't recognize sitting in his orbit, his instinct wasn't to leave, it was to dominate, because domination had worked for him for years. He drove straight at me and parked behind my car so close I couldn't reverse, got out with his hand resting on his holster like a reminder, and walked up and hammered his fist against my driver's side window, 3 hard knocks that made the glass vibrate. Step out of the vehicle, he barked like he was used to gravity itself obeying him. I rolled the window down halfway slow and asked, "Am I being detained, officer?" His eyes narrowed like I'd insulted him. I said, "Step out. Hands where I can see them." I kept my voice calm. "What's the reason?" He leaned in. "You're surveilling a police officer. That's a crime." I almost laughed because it was so stupid and so bold at the same time. "Observing someone in public isn't a crime," I said. "If you believe it is, tell me what statute you're using." He blinked like he couldn't believe I was talking back in a normal tone, because most people either comply quietly or argue loudly. They don't ask for legal specifics like they're ordering a sandwich. "You want to play lawyer with me?" he snapped. "I want your badge number and your supervisor's name," I said, and that's when I saw the anger shift into something sharper, the kind of anger that comes from a man realizing he can't control the script. "Step out or I'll pull you out," he said. So I opened the door and stood up with my hands visible, because I'm not trying to be a headline, and I handed him my driver's license, not my credentials, because I wanted to see what he'd do with just my name. He walked back to his truck, ran my information, came back clean, no warrants, no record, nothing, and he came back angrier because clean people are hard to bully. They don't give you an easy excuse. "I'm searching your vehicle," he said. "Do you have probable cause?" I asked. He inhaled through his nose like he was deciding which lie to use. "I smell weed," he said. And there it was, the classic "the greatest hit the line" that has justified more illegal searches than anyone wants to admit. I looked him right in the face. "I do not consent to any search. There is no marijuana in my car. There is no odor." He yanked my door open and started digging through my car like he was looking for a reason to exist. Glove box under the seat door pocket, and then he popped the center console and froze because inside was my FBI credential wallet and badge. He picked it up slowly like it might bite him, and his face went through confusion, surprise, recognition, fear, and then pride, and pride is the one that kills people. I said it clearly loud enough for my recording to capture every syllable. "Special Agent Darius Cole, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're interfering with a federal investigation. Return my credentials and step away from my vehicle." For a half second I thought he might do it because any sane person would. But Trent wasn't operating on sanity anymore. He was operating on panic, dressed up as authority. "I don't care who you are," he snapped like he could outrank reality. "You were stalking me." "I'm conducting authorized surveillance," I said. "You need to stop." He pulled out his cuffs like he'd rehearsed the moment in his head. "Turn around. You're under arrest." I stared at him. "You're arresting a federal agent." He leaned close, voice low, and said, "Let the judge sort it out." When those cuffs clicked shut, I didn't feel helpless the way he wanted me to. I felt something else, a cold focus, because I knew the difference between being arrested and being recorded, and he was doing the second one for me. He drove me to central booking like he was parading a trophy, and I sat in the back seat calm, because calm is how you win when someone wants you to look unstable, you know what I mean? "At booking the desk, Sergeant?" Calvin Price took one look at me and then looked at Trent. "Like, what in the world are you doing?" "Charges," Calvin asked. "Stalking a police officer," Trent said too fast. "Interfering with police duties." Calvin's eyes flicked back to me. "You don't look like a guy who spends Tuesdays stalking cops," he muttered, and I almost smiled because thank God at least one person in that building still had a functioning brain. "I'd like my phone call," I said. And Calvin hesitated for a beat, then nodded, held the phone up for me because my hands were cuffed, and I gave him a number I knew by heart. When my SAC picked up, I kept it tight and professional. "Ma'am, this is Special Agent Darius Cole. I was conducting authorized surveillance on a subject. The subject confronted me, searched my vehicle, discovered my credentials, and arrested me. I'm at central booking. No injuries. Situation stable." There was a pause, and then her voice turned into ice, the kind that makes grown men straighten their posture without knowing why. "Do not say anything else. I'm handling it." 5 minutes later, you could feel the air in the building change, phones ringing, footsteps speeding up, faces tightening, and Trent's confidence draining out of him like air from a tire, because the thing about bullies is they're brave until someone bigger walks into the room. Within half an hour, Trent got called upstairs, and I didn't see that meeting, but I heard enough afterward to picture it like a scene, the Chief Harold Stanton standing behind his desk. Internal affairs already there, the chief's face, that tight kind of furious where he's trying not to explode, and the first question out of his mouth was basically a death sentence. "Tell me you didn't just arrest an FBI agent." Trent tried to talk, tried to spin, tried to blame, but explanations don't work when the facts are loud. And IA asked the simple question that cracked everything open. "You found his FBI credentials and you arrested him anyway." That's the moment Trent's world tilted, because he wasn't just wrong. He was recorded being wrong, and there's no union contract on earth that can negotiate with video. I was released not long after, no charges filed, no paperwork that could survive daylight. The chief gave me a tight apology that felt more like damage control than regret. And I didn't argue, I didn't gloat, I didn't give him a speech. I took my credentials, retrieved my vehicle, and drove straight back to the field office with my recordings secured like they were gold bars, because in a way they were. Trent thought he'd protected himself, but what he actually did was hand our prosecutors the cleanest obstruction evidence you could ask for a film decision to interfere with a federal investigation, because his ego wouldn't let him back down. After that, the timeline moved fast, and I mean fast. 72 hours later, just after sunrise, federal agents knocked on Trent Malloy's front door with a warrant, and the media was there, because somebody decided the public deserved to see what accountability looks like when it finally shows up. Trent walked out in sweatpants, eyes hollow, hands cuffed, and I'm not gonna lie, I expected to feel satisfied like some movie ending, but what I actually felt was a strange quiet, because no matter how guilty someone is, watching a human being realize their life just split in half is heavy. The trial came months later, and the defense tried the usual dance. He didn't know the agent was FBI, except we had footage of him holding my credentials and still choosing cuffs. He had reasonable suspicion, except watching me isn't a crime, and he couldn't articulate a single fact beyond his own paranoia. They tried to paint Nolan as a liar, but Nolan's recordings had Trent's own voice laughing about payoffs and planted evidence, and they tried to explain the money, but bank records don't care about charming arguments. The jury deliberated for a handful of hours, guilty across the board, and when sentencing came down, the judge didn't perform. She spoke like she was stating the weather. 11 years in federal prison, heavy fines, pension forfeited, lifetime ban from law enforcement. And just like that, the man who treated people like disposable paperwork became paperwork himself. Afterward, the department announced reforms, new oversight body cam policies, and early warning system. All the phrases that sound great at a press conference. Some cases got reviewed, some convictions got tossed because evidence looked tainted. Settlements piled up, families got checks with too many zeros and not enough healing. And Nolan Briggs took a plea deal and did time 2 less than Trent because cooperation changes outcomes. And that's where people start arguing because it doesn't feel clean, it doesn't feel fair, it feels like justice with fingerprints on it. So here's my question for you, and I'm asking it honestly, not as a gotcha. If Trent had never arrested me, if he'd just driven away and pretended he never saw that surveillance car, do you think he still would have gone down the same way? Or do you think the machine would have protected him one more time until somebody else got hurt? And what about Nolan? Does telling the truth earn you mercy? Or does it bother you that a man who helped cover it up got a lighter sentence because he finally decided to talk? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't keep it surface level. Tell me where you land on right and wrong, on bias, on power, on what justice even means when the system is judging itself. And if you've ever witnessed abuse of authority, or you've seen a good officer try to do the right thing and get punished for it, share that too, because the more we talk about what happens in the dark, the harder it is for it to stay hidden. And if you want more stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next one might sound familiar in a way you don't expect.